For millions who had watched the clip, the lesson was personal. It told children that they didn't need to trade insults to be strong. It told immigrants that their presence and contributions were not defined by someone else's scorn. It told ordinary citizens that they too had the power to respond to arrogance, not with rage, but with truth. And perhaps that was why the moment lingered, long after the news cycle moved on. Because it wasn't really about Crockett versus Mace. It was about America versus cynicism, about dignity versus disrespect, about whether the nation would keep rewarding performative arrogance, or whether it was ready to rally around authenticity, integrity, and service. Her one line was more than a takedown. It was a mirror, held up to the country, asking, which side of this story do you want to be on? And that question, posed not in anger, but in clarity, was the true power of the moment. It transformed political theater into moral reflection. It left audiences not just entertained, but challenged, inspired, and for the first time in a long time, hopeful. Because sometimes it takes just one voice to remind an entire nation of its better self. And so, as the echoes of that one unforgettable line continue to ripple across America, we're left with more than just a viral clip. We're left with a reminder that dignity can triumph over disrespect, that authenticity can cut through arrogance, and that even in the chaos of politics, truth still has the power to silence a room. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate, she showed us a model of leadership, rooted in courage and clarity. In her calm defiance, millions saw themselves. Immigrants fighting to be recognized, women demanding respect, citizens yearning for honesty in a landscape of noise. But here's the thing, this story isn't finished. It's not just her moment, it's yours. Every time we amplify voices of dignity over voices of division, we're writing the next chapter of America's story. Every time we share, speak up, and refuse to let arrogance define the narrative, we strengthen the values we believe in. So if this moment struck a chord with you, don't just watch it, become part of it. Share this story. Let others feel the impact of that one line. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this ongoing battle of truth versus spectacle. And most importantly, carry this lesson into your own conversations, your own communities, your own choices. Because America doesn't just watch history happen, it makes it. And tonight, you've seen proof that one person, one voice, one line can change everything. The question is, when your moment comes, will you rise to it? Mace, visibly rattled now, tried to interject. "That's not," she began, her voice quivering with the strain of someone desperate to reclaim lost ground. But Crockett cut her off, not rudely, not with volume, but with composure, so sharp it felt like a blade. "No, Nancy, you've had your turn, and all America saw was arrogance. It's time they see dignity." That line, those exact words, were the death knell. The chamber roared with murmurs. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others simply shook their heads, knowing they had just witnessed a takedown that would live far beyond this committee room. And then, silence again. Crockett leaned back in her chair, calm as ever, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had said what needed to be said. There was nothing more to add. The moment hung there, suspended, until the moderator finally cleared his throat, stumbling awkwardly into the next question. But it didn't matter. Nobody was listening. The debate had effectively ended. The moment Crockett dropped that line, cameras zoomed in on Mace's face, searching for some semblance of composure. But the contrast was stark. Her flushed cheeks, her darting eyes, the tightness of her jaw. Gone was the polished confidence that had carried her at the start. In its place stood someone exposed, Someone bested, not by louder words, but by truer ones. Across America, living rooms erupted. Clips were already being shared with captions like, "This is how you handle arrogance," and Jasmine Crockett just made history. Commentators rushed to weigh in. Tweets flew from celebrities, activists, and everyday citizens alike. The moment had transcended politics. It had become culture. And in the midst of it all, Crockett remained composed. She hadn't celebrated. She hadn't gloated. She had simply delivered the truth and let it reverberate. For Nancy Mace, it was a humiliation broadcast on national stage. For Jasmine Crockett, it was the moment every struggle, every fight for dignity, every courtroom battle and late-night prep session had built toward. And for America, it was something even greater. A reminder of what real leadership looks like when tested. But as the chamber tried to recover, as staffers whispered furiously and commentators prepared their soundbites, something else was brewing. Something bigger than the moment itself. Because what had just happened wasn't going to stay inside those walls. It was about to explode across the nation. The clip hit the internet before the hearing had even adjourned. Within minutes, it was everywhere, splashed. Across Twitter feeds, ripped into TikToks, clipped by news outlets hungry for a headline. Jasmine Crockett's one line, her steady dismantling of Nancy Mace, had transformed from a committee exchange into a cultural thunderclap. The hashtags rose almost instantly. Crockett clapback. Truth over noise. Dignity wins. Each one carried thousands of reposts, comments, duets, stitches. Young activists cheered in video reactions, pointing to Crockett as the example of how to respond to arrogance with unflinching composure. Memes poured in, Mace's stunned expression, frozen side by side with Crockett's calm glare. One viral post read, "This isn't just politics. This is what it looks like when truth body slams arrogance." Cable news picked it up. Within the hour, one anchor, barely containing a smirk, described it as the mic drop heard across America. Another called it a takedown so precise it should be studied in debate classrooms. Conservative outlets scrambled, some dismissing it as scripted theatre, others insisting Mace had been set up. But the footage spoke for itself. No amount of spin could disguise the imbalance. One woman losing her cool, the other radiating dignity. By evening, the segment had crossed oceans. International outlets framed it as proof of America's deep political divides, but also as a flash of hope. In London, a newspaper ran the headline, "Dignity Silences. Arrogance in US Showdown." In India, journalists noted Crockett's insistence on service over spectacle as a line that resonated globally. And then came the endorsements, not official ones, but cultural. Celebrities tweeted their support. Musicians reposted the clip with captions like, "Play this every time you forget why we fight." Activists used it to rally around causes larger than the hearing itself. Women's dignity, immigrant pride, the rejection of performative politics. For everyday Americans, though, the power of the moment wasn't just in the words. It was in the feeling. Parents showed their kids the clip, pointing out the difference between tearing someone down and lifting yourself up with truth. Teachers replayed it in civics classes, asking students what real leadership looks like. For those who often felt erased by the noise of politics, Crockett's composure was a mirror, reflecting back dignity they hadn't always seen represented on the national stage. Meanwhile, Nancy Mace faced the storm. Headlines didn't ask whether she had made a point. They asked how she had been dismantled so thoroughly. On social media, her name trended, but not in the way any politician wants. She was the punchline. The cautionary tale, the face of arrogance crumbling under the weight of truth. And yet, what gave the moment even more weight wasn't just the downfall of Mace. It was the rise of Crockett. Commentators speculated that this was her national breakout, the kind of viral clarity that transforms a committee member into a household name. Some even drew parallels to earlier political flashpoints, moments when a single line captured the frustrations of a generation. In community halls and neighborhood conversations, people weren't quoting legislation or policy proposals. They were quoting Crockett's line, "You'll never drown out the truth." It echoed like a mantra, a rallying cry. It wasn't just about her. It was about them. The families tired of being silenced. The communities weary of being dismissed. The people who had waited for someone to stand tall without apology. But with virality came new stakes. Crockett's team received an avalanche of requests, interviews, speaking invitations, offers to headline rallies. Political veterans warned her about the dangers of sudden fame, of how quickly the narrative can turn, and yet, even those warnings carried an undercurrent of awe. Everyone knew what they had witnessed, a moment impossible to script, impossible to replicate, and impossible to ignore. The ripple effect kept spreading. By the next morning, hashtags had turned into fundraising drives. Grassroots groups had adopted the clip as a symbol, and op-eds framed Crockett as the future of progressive politics. Mace, meanwhile, struggled to regain footing, her attempts at damage control drowned out by the echo of Crockett's words. And still, the heart of the story wasn't about politics as usual. It was about values, about the stark difference between arrogance and dignity, noise and truth. The confrontation had revealed something deeper than a clash of personalities. It had revealed what Americans, deep down, were yearning for. A reminder that service, integrity, and composure still mattered. But even as the nation celebrated, the bigger question loomed. What happens when a single moment shifts not just a debate, but the trajectory of a political figure? Because Jasmine Crockett's rise was only just beginning. In the whirlwind of memes, news segments, and hashtags, it would have been easy for Jasmine Crockett to bask in the glory of a viral moment. But when she finally addressed the exchange, her tone wasn't triumphant or gloating. It was measured, humble, and rooted in something far deeper than internet fame. She reminded America that the point was never to win an argument, it was to defend dignity. She spoke of her journey, of the countless people she had met who felt silenced, overlooked, or told they didn't belong, and she framed her response to Nancy Mace not as a personal victory, but as a reflection of something larger. That every insult thrown at someone's identity, every attempt to dismiss someone's worth, is ultimately an attack on the very fabric of America. Her words landed with weight because they weren't abstract. They were lived. Crockett understood, as so many viewers did, that politics isn't just about bills and hearings. It's about who gets to be seen, who gets to speak, and who is forced to carry the burden of disrespect. Her one line, replayed millions of times, wasn't crafted to humiliate. It was crafted to affirm, to remind people that truth, said clearly and calmly, is louder than arrogance. And that struck a chord across divides. Even those who didn't share her politics admitted there was something undeniably powerful about the way she held herself. In an age where outrage often drowns out substance, Crockett embodied a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need to shout because it knows its foundation is unshakable. The moral lesson wasn't just about her composure in that one moment. It was about the choice every person faces in the face of disrespect, to sink to the level of the insult, or to rise above it with truth. Crockett chose the latter, and in doing so, she turned what could have been another forgettable clash into a defining symbol of dignity. She reminded America that leadership isn't about volume, it's about values. It's not about how loud you can shout, but how deeply you can stand in your convictions. And in that hearing room, while Nancy Mace scrambled for attention, Crockett revealed what it looks like to stand for something greater than yourself. The irony was almost cinematic. Mace believed she was the one setting the trap, delivering the performance, orchestrating the moment. But history has a way of flipping the script. What she thought would be her victory lap would instead become the scene of her unraveling, and as the cameras rolled, as millions watched, Nancy Mace walked straight into the moment that would redefine her career. But she had no idea who she was about to face. Origin story, attorney, fighter for justice, voice for dignity, show struggles, resilience, authenticity. Frame her as the hero America didn't know it needed. Tease. And when the confrontation came, every battle she'd fought prepared her for that one line. The debate had already been tense, but as the exchanges wore on, the tension thickened like smoke in a sealed room. Nancy Mace leaned into her microphone with a confidence that bordered on smugness, each word laced with the assurance that she could command the stage simply by being louder, sharper, more cutting than her opponent. Her jabs grew more pointed, more personal, and with each one she looked for the cameras as if they were her true audience. "You're out of your depth," she sneered at one point, her tone dripping with condescension. "You can't possibly think you understand the stakes of this committee the way I do." The smirk returned, the kind of expression meant to humiliate rather than persuade. A few of her allies chuckled, nodding along as though the exchange was little more than entertainment. But Crockett didn't flinch. She sat poised, her gaze steady, her body language unshaken. Where Mace gestured theatrically, Crockett remained still. Where Mace sought to rattle her opponent with noise, Crockett absorbed the blows in silence, her calm demeanor only heightening the anticipation in the room. It was a contrast as stark as day and night. One woman flailing in self-assured arrogance, the other radiating control without needing to raise her voice. The sparring intensified. Mace accused Crockett of being unprepared, of lacking the pedigree to even sit at the table. Her voice rose, fueled by the adrenaline of someone who believed the moment was hers for the taking. "You don't belong here," she said flatly, punctuating her words with a gesture that seemed designed to belittle. The room stirred, murmurs growing louder, as if everyone sensed the line had been crossed. Crockett's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but her tone remained measured. She countered Mace's attacks with quiet precision, returning again and again to the facts, the principles, the reasons she had stepped into the political arena in the first place. Where Mace sought spectacle, Crockett offered substance. It wasn't flashy, but it was steady, relentless, the kind of composure that frustrates an opponent who relies on chaos. The more Crockett refused to bite, the more desperate Mace became. Her words shifted from argument to insult, from strategy to raw antagonism. Every attempt to provoke seemed to fall flat against Crockett's calm. Viewers at home could feel the balance shifting, the energy tilting. The arrogance that had once made Mace look commanding now made her look exposed, as if she was shadowboxing an opponent who refused to play her game. And yet, Crockett's silence wasn't passive. It was strategic. Each pause, each refusal to rise to the bait, was building tension like a coiled spring. The audience leaned closer, Sensing something was coming, social feeds buzzed. She's about to land something. She's holding back. Mace, oblivious to the trap she was walking into, pushed harder. Her voice sharpened into a blade. Her gestures exaggerated for effect. This is why people like you can't be trusted with real responsibility. She spat, the words cutting across the chamber. It was meant to be the final blow, the insult that cemented her dominance. But in that moment, the silence after the insult was louder than Mace's voice had ever been. Crockett waited. She let the weight of the words linger, not rushing, not flinching, allowing the room to feel the full discomfort of what had just been said. The smirk on Mace's face flickered just slightly, as though she realized she had overplayed her hand. And then Crockett moved. She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm, measured, unwavering. The anticipation was electric, the air heavy with the expectation that something unforgettable was about to be said. And then she dropped the line, heard across America. The pause before Jasmine Crockett spoke seemed to last forever. For a split second, the entire chamber was suspended in silence. No shuffling of papers, no whispers from staffers, no chuckles from the sidelines. Even Nancy Mace froze. Her lips still parted in anticipation of a retort that never came. Crockett's composure was unnerving. It was the composure of someone who knew she was about to change the entire tenor of the moment. And then she spoke. Her words weren't loud, but they were deliberate, resonant, carrying the weight of truth that no insult could diminish. "Nancy," she said softly, her eyes locked on her opponent. "The difference between you and me is that I know who I am, and I don't need to tear anyone else down to prove it." The effect was instantaneous. Mace blinked, caught, off guard by the steadiness of the delivery. Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't matched insult for insult. She had cut deeper, not into Mace's talking points, but into the hollowness of her performance. A ripple went through the room, a murmur, a shifting in chairs. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing that the exchange had crossed into something bigger than political sparring. Crockett continued, her tone firm, her cadence steady. "You've built your career on chasing cameras, on finding the next headline that will keep your name in the news. But while you've been busy playing politics, some of us have been out here fighting for people who don't have a voice. You don't get to question whether I belong here. I earned this seat, every single step of the way." Mace shifted uncomfortably, but Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned in further, as if to close the gap between herself and the nation watching. "You think power is about arrogance. I think power is about service. You think winning is about silencing others. I think winning is about lifting others up. And that," she said, her voice unwavering, "is why no matter how loud you get, you'll never drown out the truth." It was surgical. Each sentence sliced through the facade Mace had built, exposing the opportunism beneath. The smirk that had defined her performance melted away. Replaced by a flush of frustration, she opened her mouth to respond. But the timing was gone. Crockett had seized it. The chamber was no longer hers. Gasps filled the air. Someone in the gallery audibly whispered, "Oh my God." Even among Mace's allies, there was a visible shift. Some avoided eye contact. Others shuffled papers, pretending distraction. It was the universal body language of people realizing they were standing too close to a political explosion. And Crockett pressed on. She didn't stop at one line. She built a case, each word resonating like the gavel of a judge, declaring order. "You talk about responsibility," she continued. "But what responsibility have you shown? Responsibility isn't measured. in sound bites. It's measured in who you stand up for when nobody's watching. It's measured in whether you use your platform to serve or to stunt. And when history looks back on this moment, it won't remember your insults. It'll remember that you tried to tear down another woman for sport, and that I refused to let you. The chamber erupted in murmurs again. Phones buzzed in pockets as staffers scrambled to text updates, knowing instantly that this clip would dominate the evening feeds. Social media had already begun to light up, hashtags forming in real time, snippets of Crockett's words flooding timelines. Truth over noise. Crockett clapped back. Mic drop moment. The room was already thick with tension, the kind of silence that feels like a storm, gathering just out of sight. Cameras zoomed in, every face taut with anticipation, as the exchange between Nancy Mace and Jasmine Crockett hit its boiling point. Mace leaned forward, smirking with that brand of confidence born not of truth, but of arrogance sharpened by years of political theatre. Her words sliced through the air, sharp, dismissive, designed to belittle. For a heartbeat, it seemed she had claimed the upper hand. And then, Jasmine Crockett struck. It wasn't a tirade. It wasn't a lecture. It was one line, clean, precise, devastating. A line so sharp, it cut through Mace's performance like glass, shattering in a quiet room. The chamber froze. You could see aides shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Glances exchanged, as if to confirm. Did she really just say that? On social media, seconds later, fingers flew across keyboards. Hashtags were born in real time. The camera caught Mace's face as the smirk collapsed into a stunned half grimace, her confidence draining faster than the air from the room. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She let the silence do the work. The silence was louder than any applause, heavier than any speech. Her composure was the dagger, her restraint the kill shot. Viewers at home sat forward, mouths open, as if history itself had tilted on its axis. Because it wasn't just the takedown of a congresswoman on live television. It was a declaration, a reminder that arrogance collapses under the weight of truth, and that dignity, spoken at the right moment, can change the course of a debate, a career, a narrative. The commentators didn't even know where to begin. Some tried to downplay it. Others scrambled for words like savage, humiliating, career-defining. But no matter the spin, one fact was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett had just delivered the kind of moment politicians dream of, an opponent's fear. And yet, for those watching, the question lingered. How did this moment come to be? How did a freshman lawmaker, once underestimated, become the center of America's attention with a single, devastating line? But to understand why this one line sent shockwaves through America, we need to rewind. In 2025, America was standing on a knife's edge. Every committee hearing, every debate, every word uttered by its elected officials seemed less like governance and more like a battle in a culture war that had seeped into every living room in the nation. This wasn't politics as usual. It was politics as survival. What unfolded in that chamber between Nancy Mace and Jasmine Crockett was not just another heated exchange. It was a reflection of the larger struggle for the very soul of the country. The committee itself mattered more than most viewers realized. It wasn't just about policy on paper. This was the forum where the future direction of federal investigations, accountability, and public trust would be shaped. The stakes were immense: credibility of government, checks on power, the question of who gets to define justice in a polarized America. Every face at that long mahogany table carried not just personal ambition, but the weight of constituencies, ideologies, and histories colliding in real time. And Nancy Mace knew that. She wasn't speaking to Crockett alone. She was speaking to the cameras, to her base, to the endless loop of clips that would circulate on partisan networks and social feeds within minutes. Her words were calculated for outrage. Her performance sharpened to score political points. In that kind of environment, dignity is often drowned out by noise. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't playing by the same rules. She wasn't there to trade insults for headlines. She carried the weight of something far larger. The lived experiences of those who had long been told they didn't belong. The echo of immigrant stories woven into the fabric of America. The reminder that truth still has a place in the halls of power. That's why her response mattered. It wasn't simply about winning a verbal sparring match. It was about reclaiming the conversation itself. America prides itself on the ideal of equality, yet the toxic rhetoric of division has gnawed at that promise for years. The chamber that day became a stage where those two forces collided. The cynicism of political theatre versus the authenticity of lived truth. Millions watching could feel it. Social media feeds didn't wait for the news cycle. They exploded in real time. Voices pouring in from every corner of the country. Some expressed outrage at Mace's arrogance. Others awe at Crockett's composure. Many, especially those from immigrant families or marginalized communities, felt something deeper, validation. For once, someone had spoken back, not with rage, not with noise, but with a line that carried the weight of history and the dignity of restraint. This is why the moment wasn't just viral. It was personal. It was emotional. It reminded people that politics could still surprise, that the underdog could still rise, and that arrogance could still be undone by truth, delivered at the right moment. And yet, as the silence in the chamber lingered, it became clear. This was not an isolated skirmish. What was about to unfold would ripple far beyond those walls. It would spark headlines, ignite debates, and mark a turning point in how America viewed both Nancy Mace and Jasmine Crockett. Because what happened next wasn't just political theatre. It became a national moment. To understand why Nancy Mace's clash with Jasmine Crockett carried such weight, you first have to understand who Nancy Mace had become by 2025. Her name had become synonymous with contradiction. She branded herself as a moderate when it suited her, yet leaned hard into culture, war rhetoric when the cameras were on. She styled herself as a voice of reason, but often her sharpest lines were less about reason and more about spectacle. To her critics, she was less a leader and more an opportunist, someone who sensed which way the political winds were blowing and bent herself accordingly, chasing headlines instead of principles. Mace's career had been a study in carefully orchestrated image management. She knew the value of a viral clip, of a snappy soundbite designed to dominate the evening news. Time and again, she managed to insert herself into the center of controversy, not always by leading policy discussions, but by mastering the theater of politics. In the age of clicks and clips, she had perfected the art of provocation, a well-placed jab at a political opponent, a clever turn of phrase, an insult meant to sting. It was a strategy that kept her relevant, even when her legislative record was thin. But beneath the polished media strategy was a reputation that made many wary. Colleagues whispered of her arrogance, her tendency to treat politics as a personal performance rather than a public trust. Allies described her as restless, always eyeing the next opportunity, the next promotion, the next platform. Enemies painted her as disloyal, quick to switch sides if it meant survival. Even supporters quietly admitted she often seemed more interested in herself than in the people she claimed to represent. And yet, Mace had thrived in that ambiguity. For years, she managed to straddle the line between critic and loyalist, insider and outsider. She kept herself visible, unpredictable, and always in the spotlight. It was a balancing act that gave her headlines, yes, but also left her vulnerable. Because in politics, the longer you play both sides, the more you reveal that you stand firmly on none. That arrogance came to a head in debates, like the one against Jasmine Crockett. Mace entered the chamber, armed with the same tricks that had kept her afloat for so long. Biting sarcasm, polished contempt, and an instinct for provocation. She was confident, perhaps too confident, that another well-aimed barb would put her opponent on the defensive and secure yet another viral win. Her smirk that day wasn't just about Crockett. It was about the audience she imagined at home, clapping along as she delivered her line. But arrogance has a way of clouding judgment. In her eagerness to score another viral clip, Mace underestimated who was sitting across from her. She mistook Crockett for another sparring partner to toy with, another backdrop for her political theatre. She didn't recognize the quiet strength, the calm fire, or the years of preparation that made Crockett different from the opponents she had sparred with before. Mace's contradictions had carried her this far, but they were also her greatest weakness. She could play both sides of the political divide, but when confronted with someone who embodied clarity and conviction, her opportunism would be exposed for what it truly was. She could trade insults, but she couldn't withstand truth. Delivered with precision, she could smirk for the cameras, but she couldn't control what happened when the cameras turned to someone more authentic, more grounded, more prepared. That's why this moment mattered. It wasn't just another debate. It was the culmination of years of contradictions finally catching up to Nancy Mace. She had lived by the sword of spectacle, and now she stood face to face with someone who could end her reign with a single line.